A 6-year-old boy climbed onto the diner booth and asked Naomi Carter to marry him. She laughed, said yes, slipped his plastic ring on her finger like it was a game. It wasn't. Outside, in a black sedan with windows you couldn't see through, his father made one phone call. Marco Russo, the name whispered in back rooms where men disappeared. He'd been watching her for 20 minutes, studying how she smiled at his son, how she knelt to his level when others wouldn't. And when she accepted that ring, something shifted in his eyes. Not love. Strategy. By sunrise, 3 men in suits would be at her apartment door. Her bills mysteriously paid. Her landlord suddenly silent. And Naomi, tired, alone, invisible to everyone who mattered, would realize the most dangerous thing she'd ever done was be kind to a child whose father owned half the city. That plastic ring? It was a contract written in blood she couldn't see yet. And the choice to say yes as a joke would become the choice that saved her or destroyed her. She just didn't know which. Lena's Diner sat on the corner of 5th and Harmon, the kind of place where the coffee was always too hot and the air conditioning never worked right. Naomi had been wiping down the same tables for 3 years. Booth 7 had a crack in the vinyl that pinched your leg if you sat wrong. The jukebox in the corner hadn't played since 2019. The regulars knew her name. The tourists didn't tip. That was the rhythm of her life. Predictable, safe, small. She'd learned to find comfort in the smallness. No surprises meant no disappointments. No hopes meant no heartbreak. Just the smell of bacon grease and burnt toast, the sound of dishes clattering in the back, and the weight of her feet after an 8-hour shift. That Tuesday started like every other. Mr. Henley ordered his usual scrambled eggs. The college kid in the corner nursed one coffee for 2 hours. And then the door opened. The man who walked in didn't belong. His coat was tailored. His shoes had never seen a scuff. He moved with the kind of quiet confidence that made people step aside without knowing why. But it was the boy who caught Naomi's attention. 6 years old, maybe 7. Dark curls, eyes that watched everything. He held his father's hand but didn't cling, didn't fidget, didn't whine for candy or complain about being bored. He just observed, calm, patient, unusual. They sat in booth 4. Naomi brought menus. The man ordered black coffee and a grilled cheese for the boy. His voice was polite, low, the kind of voice that didn't need to be raised to be obeyed. Naomi smiled at the boy. He smiled back. And in that moment, something invisible passed between them. Recognition, maybe, or need. She couldn't name it. When the man stepped outside to take a call, the boy climbed onto the seat. That's when it happened. That's when he asked. And Naomi, tired and kind and used to making children feel seen, said yes. She thought it was harmless, a moment of play in a world that didn't offer much. But outside, through the diner window, the man stood perfectly still, listening, watching. And when Naomi slipped that plastic ring onto her finger and ruffled the boy's hair, something in his expression changed. He ended his call, walked back inside, paid in cash, left a tip 3 times too large, and as they walked out, the boy turned back one last time, waved. Naomi waved back. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and if you're new here, click that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because what happened next? Naomi would never see that diner the same way again. Naomi Carter wasn't always a waitress. There was a time when she wore scrubs instead of an apron. When she studied late into the night with textbooks spread across her kitchen table, highlighters in 3 colors, coffee going cold beside her. She was going to be a nurse. Not because it paid well, though that mattered, but because she wanted to help people, to be the hand someone held when they were scared, to be the voice that said everything would be okay, even when it wouldn't. She got halfway through her certification. Then her mother got sick. Stage 3. The kind of cancer that doesn't negotiate. Naomi dropped out to become a full-time caregiver, bathing her mother, cooking meals that wouldn't be eaten, holding her hand through the bad nights when pain made sleep impossible. Her husband, Marcus, said he understood. For the first 6 months, maybe he did, but understanding turned to resentment. Resentment turned to distance. He started working late, coming home smelling like perfume that wasn't hers. When her mother finally passed, Naomi thought maybe they could rebuild. But Marcus had already built something else. Someone else. The divorce papers came 3 weeks after the funeral. He got the house they'd saved for. She got the debt from medical bills insurance wouldn't cover. Naomi moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in a building where the elevator broke twice a month and the neighbors fought loud enough to shake the walls. She couldn't afford to go back to school, couldn't afford therapy, couldn't afford to fall apart. So she didn't. She applied at Lena's diner because it was walking distance and they were hiring. The work was simple, mindless, the kind of job where you could smile on autopilot and let your mind go somewhere else. Her hands learned the routine, pouring coffee without looking, balancing 3 plates on one arm, wiping down tables with the same circular motion over and over until the formica shone. Her feet ached by hour 5. Her lower back throbbed by hour 7. But she didn't complain. Complaining required energy she didn't have. The one thing that still made her smile? Children. When families came in with kids, Naomi always volunteered to take their table. She'd bring extra crayons, draw smiley faces on the kids' meal receipts, kneel down to their level and ask about their favorite cartoons, their imaginary friends, their dreams of being astronauts or dinosaurs or both, because children didn't lie, didn't pretend, didn't perform. They just were. And being around them reminded Naomi of a version of herself she'd lost somewhere between the hospital room and the divorce lawyer's office. She'd wanted kids. Her and Marcus had talked about it. 2, maybe 3. A house with a backyard. Birthday parties with homemade cake. But that future got filed away with the marriage certificate and the nursing school transcripts. Things that existed once but didn't anymore. Some nights, after her shift, Naomi would walk home and pass the elementary school on Maple Street. She'd hear the playground sounds, laughter, shouting, the squeak of swings. And something in her chest would tighten. Not quite grief, not quite longing, something in between. She told herself she was fine, that this was enough. That wanting more was how you ended up disappointed. But late at night, when the apartment was too quiet and the neighbors had finally stopped fighting, she'd lie awake and wonder what it would feel like to matter to someone again, to be needed. Not as a waitress who refilled water glasses, but as a person, as someone worth staying for. She didn't know that wonder was a dangerous thing, that the universe sometimes listens, and that when it answers, it doesn't always ask if you're ready. The plastic ring sat on her dresser that night. She'd meant to throw it away. It was just a toy, a moment, nothing. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the way the boy had looked at her, like she was important, like her yes had meant something. So she left it there, next to her phone, next to the stack of unpaid bills she was trying not to think about. And when she finally fell asleep, she dreamed of a child's laughter, of small hands holding hers, of a life where kindness didn't cost anything. She didn't know yet that kindness always costs something. The only question is whether you can afford to pay. Marco Russo didn't make impulsive decisions. Every move was calculated, every word measured, every relationship a transaction with terms he controlled. He'd built an empire on that principle. You don't survive in his world by trusting your gut. You survive by watching, listening, knowing which people break and which people bend. And from the moment he walked into that diner, he'd been watching Naomi Carter. It started as routine. His son, Luca, had been asking to stop. Something about the pancakes. Marco didn't care about pancakes, but he cared about his son's rare requests. So he pulled over, walked in, sat down. Nothing special, just another Tuesday errand in a life full of them. But then Naomi appeared. And Marco noticed things. The way she approached their table with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The exhaustion she carried in her shoulders. the careful politeness that came from years of being overlooked. She was invisible, the kind of person people ordered from and forgot before the check arrived. But Luca didn't forget. His son watched her with an intensity that made Marco pause. Luca had been quiet since his mother died. 18 months of silence, punctuated by one-word answers and nightmares Marco didn't know how to fix. Therapists used words like trauma and attachment and processing. Marco nodded, paid them. Nothing changed. But when Naomi knelt down to Luca's level and asked what he wanted, something shifted. His son smiled. Small. Real. The first genuine smile Marco had seen in months. So Marco stayed longer than necessary. Ordered coffee he didn't drink, made a phone call he didn't need to make, and watched. He watched how Naomi moved through the diner, how she remembered the old man's usual order without asking, how she slipped extra napkins to the woman with the crying baby, how she worked like someone who'd learned survival meant staying useful. She wasn't beautiful in the way the women in Marco's world were beautiful. No designer clothes, no practiced elegance, no performance. She was tired, human, real. And that was exactly what Marco needed. His son needed someone untouched by the violence that had taken his mother. Someone who didn't flinch at his last name or whisper about blood on his father's hands. Someone clean. When Luca climbed onto that booth and asked Naomi to marry him, Marco felt something click into place. Most people would have laughed it off and walked away. But Naomi didn't. She bent down, took the proposal seriously, made his son feel heard. And when she slipped that plastic ring onto her finger, Marco saw opportunity. Not romance, not love. Opportunity. He knew what his world did to people, how it corrupted, how it took soft things and made them sharp. His son was growing up in shadows Marco couldn't erase. But maybe, just maybe, he could bring in some light. Someone who could remind Luca that kindness existed, that gentleness wasn't weakness, that not everyone lived by the rules Marco enforced. Naomi Carter had no idea what she'd just agreed to. The plastic ring was a joke to her, a sweet moment she'd forget by tomorrow. But to Marco, it was a contract. His son had chosen her. And in Marco's world, when his son asked for something, Marco delivered. The question wasn't whether Naomi would come into their lives. The question was how to make her stay. And Marco always found a way. He left the diner with his son's hand in his. Luca was humming. Quiet. Content. Marco pulled out his phone, made 3 calls before they reached the car. By morning, Naomi's landlord would receive a payment. Her overdue bills would vanish. The manager at the diner would get an anonymous tip that made Naomi's shifts easier. Small things. Invisible things. The kind of things that didn't raise alarms. Yet, Marco Russo didn't kidnap, didn't threaten, didn't force. He simply made people need him. And by the time they realized they were trapped, leaving felt more dangerous than staying. Naomi woke up Wednesday morning to silence. No angry pounding from the apartment above. No sirens outside. Just quiet. Strange. She made instant coffee and checked her phone. 3 missed calls from a number she didn't recognize. No voicemail. Probably spam. She got dressed for her shift and grabbed her purse. That's when she noticed the envelope. Someone had slid it under her door. No name, no return address, just a plain white envelope that felt too thick to be junk mail. Inside was a check, made out to her, for the exact amount she owed on her overdue electric bill. Down to the cent. Her hands went cold. Who knew that number? She'd told no one. Hadn't posted about it. Hadn't complained to coworkers. She'd just been quietly panicking every time she saw the disconnect notice taped to her door. But now, the notice was gone. And there was money she hadn't earned sitting in her hands. Naomi told herself it was a mistake. Some kind of clerical error. Maybe the landlord had finally fixed something and this was, what? A refund? That didn't make sense. Nothing made sense. She went to work, tried to focus, poured coffee, took orders, smiled until her face hurt. But her mind kept circling back to that envelope, to the check with her name on it in neat, printed letters. When her shift ended, She stopped by the property management office. The woman behind the desk looked confused when Naomi asked about the electric bill, checked her computer, frowned, then said something that made Naomi's stomach drop. It had been paid in full. Yesterday. Cash payment. Anonymous. The woman shrugged like it was no big deal. Like mysterious strangers paid people's bills all the time. Naomi walked home in a daze. Her feet moved on autopilot while her brain tried to assemble pieces that didn't fit. She pushed open her apartment door and froze. The eviction notice that had been taped to her door for 3 weeks was gone. The sticky residue was still there, but the paper had vanished. Her hands were shaking when she called the landlord. He answered on the second ring, and his voice was different. Friendly. Warm. Almost apologetic. He told her there'd been a mistake with her account, that she was current on rent, that she shouldn't worry. He didn't explain how a 3-month debt had disappeared overnight. He just said everything was fine now. Everything was taken care of. Naomi sat on her couch and stared at the plastic ring still sitting on her dresser. She'd meant to throw it out, had walked past it a dozen times, but something kept stopping her. Now it sat there under the lamplight, cheap and translucent and somehow ominous. She picked it up, turned it over in her fingers. It was just plastic, just a toy. But her skin prickled like she was being watched. Naomi walked to her window and looked out at the street. Normal. Empty. A few parked cars, a dog walker, nothing unusual. But the feeling didn't leave. That night, she couldn't sleep. Every small sound made her jump. The refrigerator humming, the radiator clanking. Footsteps in the hallway that might have been her neighbor or might have been something else. She kept thinking about the man in the diner, the one with the tailored coat and the too large tip, the one whose son had asked her to marry him. She didn't even know his name, didn't know where he lived, didn't know anything, except that he'd left an impression she couldn't shake. Coincidence, she told herself. It had to be coincidence. But Naomi had lived long enough to know that when things seemed too good to be true, they usually were. Someone was helping her. Someone with money. Someone who knew her address, her debts, her landlord. Someone who'd been watching. And the only person who'd paid any attention to her in months was that man. That quiet, calm man who'd stood outside the diner window and listened to his son's proposal like it mattered. Naomi looked at the plastic ring on her finger. She'd put it on as a joke. Worn at home because it made her smile. But now it felt like a mark. Like something that identified her. Like something that said, this one, she belongs to us now. Would you stay calm if your bills disappeared overnight? If someone you didn't know started solving your problems without asking? Drop a comment. Tell me what you'd do. Because Naomi was about to find out she didn't have a choice. The knock came at 8:30 on Thursday night. 3 slow, deliberate strikes against the door. Not the frantic pounding of a neighbor. Not the quick tap of a delivery person. This was something else. Naomi froze with her fork halfway to her mouth. Instant ramen cooling in the bowl in front of her. She wasn't expecting anyone. Didn't have friends who dropped by. Her ex-husband certainly wouldn't visit. She stood slowly and walked to the door, her heartbeat loud in her ears. The peephole showed 2 men, both in dark suits. Both standing with their hands clasped in front of them like security guards, like soldiers. One was older, maybe 50, with gray at his temples and the kind of face that had forgotten how to smile. The other was younger, broader, with a scar that cut through his left eyebrow. Neither looked like they were here to chat. Naomi's first instinct was to pretend she wasn't home, to back away quietly, to call. Who? The police? And say what? 2 well-dressed men knocked on my door? But before she could move, the older man spoke. His voice carried through the door, calm and professional, not threatening, almost polite. Miss Carter, we're not here to hurt you. We just need a moment of your time. Her name. They knew her name. Of course they did. They'd known everything else. The bills, the debts, the apartment number. Naomi's mouth went dry. She didn't open the door. Not yet. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. Who are you? A pause. Then the man answered. We work for Marco Russo. He'd like to speak with you. Everything clicked into place. The paid bills, the vanished debt, the checks with no return address. It had been him. The man from the diner. The father of the boy who'd asked her to marry him. But why? What did he want? The younger man stepped forward slightly, and Naomi flinched back even though the door was still between them. His voice was softer than she expected. "You're not in trouble, Miss Carter. Mr. Russo just wants to thank you for being kind to his son. Nothing more." Naomi knew that was a lie. Men like this didn't show up at your apartment at night just to say thank you. Men like this didn't pay your rent because you were nice to a kid. This was something else, something bigger, and she was already caught in it. She could refuse, could tell them to leave, could call the police and hope that mattered. But a small, tired part of her brain whispered the truth she didn't want to hear. If they wanted to hurt you, they already would have. If they wanted to take you, the door wouldn't stop them. And if Marco Russo wanted something, saying no might be more dangerous than saying yes. Naomi took a breath, unlocked the door, opened it 6 inches. The two men didn't push forward, didn't move at all, just stood there, patient and still, waiting for her to make the choice. The older man's eyes were dark, but not cruel. "There's a car downstairs. Mr. Russo would like to meet with you. Tonight. Just a conversation. We'll bring you right back home. Safe." Naomi looked past them into the hallway. Empty. Quiet. No witnesses. No one to help if this went wrong. But somehow, she knew it wouldn't. Not yet. Whatever this was, it wasn't violence. Not the kind that left bruises. Anyway, she thought about the plastic ring still sitting on her dresser, about the boy's serious eyes, about the way his father had watched her like she was a puzzle he needed to solve. And she realized she wanted answers, needed them. Because living with this mystery, with the invisible hands rearranging her life, was worse than facing whatever waited in that car. "Okay," she said. "Let me get my jacket." The younger man almost smiled. Almost. 5 minutes later, Naomi was sitting in the back of a black sedan, with leather seats and windows tinted so dark she couldn't see out. The older man sat beside her. The younger one drove. Neither spoke. The silence was heavy, oppressive. Naomi's hands twisted in her lap, fingers knotting together to keep from shaking. She tried to memorize the route. Left out of her building, right on 7th, straight for what felt like miles. But the tinted windows made everything a blur. She had no idea where they were going, no idea if she'd ever make it back. Her phone was in her pocket. She thought about texting someone. But who? She didn't have anyone who'd notice if she disappeared. No family left. No close friends. Just coworkers who'd assume she'd quit. Maybe that was why she'd been chosen. Because she was alone. Because no one would ask questions. The car climbed a hill. The engine purred, expensive and smooth. The streets outside grew quieter, richer. The kind of neighborhood where houses had gates and driveways disappeared behind walls of trees. They stopped in front of iron gates that opened without anyone pressing a button, as if the car itself was expected, as if everything had been planned. The mansion beyond the gates was massive, stone and glass, lit from within by soft, golden light. Beautiful in a way that felt cold. The car pulled up to the front entrance. The older man opened Naomi's door and offered his hand like a gentleman. She didn't take it. Stepped out on her own. Her legs felt unsteady, but she kept her chin up, refused to look as scared as she felt. The front door opened before they reached it. And standing there, framed by light, was him, Marco Russo, the man whose son had asked her to marry him, the man who'd been rearranging her life from the shadows. He looked at her with those same calm, assessing eyes, and then he smiled, not warmly, not cruelly, just knowingly. "Miss Carter," he said, "thank you for coming. Shall we talk?" The inside of the mansion was nothing like Naomi expected. No gaudy gold fixtures, no animal heads mounted on walls, no ostentatious displays of wealth that screamed, "Look at what I own!" Instead, it was quiet, tasteful, expensive in the way things are when money isn't trying to prove anything. Dark wood floors, minimalist furniture, art on the walls that probably cost more than her entire life. Marco led her through a hallway into a study lined with books. A fire crackled in the fireplace, even though it wasn't that cold outside. 2 chairs faced each other near the hearth. He gestured to one. Naomi sat. He sat across from her, close enough to talk quietly, but far enough that she didn't feel trapped. The 2 men who'd brought her stayed by the door, silent, watching. Marco leaned back and studied her for a moment, not in a way that felt predatory, more like he was confirming something he already knew. Then he spoke. "I imagine you have questions." Naomi's throat was dry. She forced herself to meet his eyes. "Why did you pay my bills?" A slight smile, almost amused. "Because my son asked you to marry him, and you said yes." "That's not an answer." Marco tilted his head. "It's the only answer that matters. In my world, Miss Carter, promises are binding, even the ones made in jest, especially those." Naomi's pulse hammered. "This is insane. I was being nice to a kid." "I didn't agree to. Whatever this is." "I know. But my son doesn't understand jokes. He took you seriously. And so do I." She stood up, adrenaline overriding fear. "I want to leave. You're free to go. The door is right there." Marco gestured casually. "No one will stop you." The men by the door didn't move, didn't even look at her. But Naomi knew if she walked out, this wouldn't end. The paid bills, the anonymous help, it would keep happening. She'd keep living under the weight of this invisible obligation until she understood what it meant. She sat back down. "What do you want from me?" Marco's expression softened, not into kindness, into something more honest, transparency. "My son's mother died 18 months ago. Cancer. Since then, he's been diminished. Therapists, medication, nothing works. He doesn't smile, doesn't play, doesn't connect." He stared into the fire, and for a moment, Marco looked less like a powerful man and more like a tired father. Then he met you. And for the first time since his mother passed, he asked for something. Someone. Naomi's chest tightened. "I'm sorry for your loss, but I'm not a replacement for his mother." "I'm not asking you to be." Marco leaned forward. "I'm asking you to be present, to spend time with him, to let him believe, even for a little while, that promises can be kept." That was when the door opened, and the boy walked in. Luca. He was wearing pajamas with dinosaurs on them. His hair was messy. His eyes were still serious, still too old, but when he saw Naomi, they lit up. "You came," he said, like it was a fact he'd known all along. Naomi's heart cracked. She didn't know what to say. Luca crossed the room and stood in front of her. He held out his hand. The same plastic ring she'd given back to him at the diner sat in his small palm. "You dropped this," he said solemnly. Naomi took it. Her hands were trembling. "Thank you." Luca looked at his father. "Can she stay?" For a moment, the powerful, calculating man softened. "We'll see," he said gently. "That's up to her." Luca turned back to Naomi. His voice was quiet, small. "Please?" One word. One plea from a child who'd lost too much. And Naomi felt every wall she'd built collapse. This wasn't about Marco. Wasn't about money or power or danger. It was about a boy who believed she'd made him a promise. And maybe, somewhere deep down, it was about her too. About the child she'd lost before it was born. About the family she'd never had. About the chance to matter to someone again. Marco watched her carefully. "You can leave any time. No strings. No obligations. But if you stay, I'll make sure you're taken care of. Financially, safely. You'll want for nothing." Naomi looked at Luca, at his hopeful eyes. At the way he held himself so carefully, like he'd learned not to expect good things. And she made a choice she knew might destroy her. "I'll stay. For a little while." Luca smiled. Marco nodded once. Then it settled. One of the men by the door stepped forward. "He'll take you home. We'll arrange everything." As Naomi stood to leave, Luca hugged her. Quick! Tight. Like he was afraid she'd disappear. She hugged him back. And when she pulled away, She saw something in Marco's eyes she hadn't expected: gratitude. And maybe, just maybe, the faintest flicker of guilt, because they both knew she hadn't really made a choice at all. Naomi didn't sleep that night. She lay in her apartment, staring at the ceiling, the plastic ring on her nightstand catching the streetlight through her window. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Luca's face, that hopeful smile, that quiet please. She'd agreed to something she didn't fully understand. Agreed to enter the life of a man whose name made people go silent. Agreed to become a fixture in a world built on violence and control. But when she tried to imagine saying no, tried to picture walking away from that little boy, her chest felt hollow, because she knew what it was like to lose everything. To have the people who were supposed to stay just leave. Her father had left when she was 9. Her husband had left when her mother got sick. Everyone left. And she'd survived by learning not to need anyone. Not to hope. Not to trust that good things would last. But Luca had looked at her like she was already part of his life. Like her promise was real. And maybe that was why she'd said yes. Not because Marco had paid her bills, or because men in suits had knocked on her door, but because a child believed she was someone worth keeping. She thought about her own loss. The baby that never made it past 12 weeks. The nursery that never got built. The name she and Marcus had picked out and never said aloud again. Everyone told her she could try again, that she was young, that there was time. But then her mother got sick, and Marcus left, and time turned into survival, and survival didn't leave room for dreams. Luca wasn't her child, could never be her child. But maybe, for a little while, she could be something to him, a presence, a promise kept, a reminder that not everyone disappeared. Was that enough reason to stay in the orbit of a dangerous man? Was that enough reason to risk everything she'd worked to rebuild? Naomi didn't know. The next morning, a text message arrived from an unknown number. A car will pick you up at noon. Luca is excited to see you. No signature, no explanation, just an instruction wrapped in politeness. She could ignore it. Could block the number. Could pack a bag and leave town before anyone noticed. But where would she go? She had no money, no family, no connections beyond this city. And Marco had already proven he could find her, could reach her, could rearrange her life without her permission. Maybe staying was safer than running. Or maybe that was just what she told herself to justify the choice she'd already made. At 11:45, Naomi changed into the nicest clothes she owned. A simple dress. Flats that didn't hurt her feet. She brushed her hair and looked at herself in the mirror. She looked tired, older than 42, but her eyes were clearer than they'd been in months. Because for the first time in years, she was doing something that mattered, even if she didn't fully understand what it was. The car arrived exactly at noon, the same younger man from before. He opened the door for her without speaking. Naomi got in. As the city blurred past the window, she thought about the question Marco had asked. "You're free to go." But was she? Really? Or had the moment she said yes to a 6-year-old boy been the moment she stopped belonging to herself? She didn't know. But as the mansion gates opened and she saw Luca waiting on the front steps, grinning like she'd just given him the world, Naomi realized something. She didn't want to leave. Not yet. Not when someone finally needed her again. And maybe that made her foolish. Maybe that made her trapped. But for now, it made her feel alive. What would you have done? Would you have walked away from a child who believed in you? Or would you have stayed, knowing the cost might be everything? Comment below, because Naomi's choice was only the beginning. The first week was strange. Naomi would arrive at the mansion in the afternoon and spend hours with Luca. They'd read books, build with blocks, draw pictures of dinosaurs and spaceships, normal things. Kid things. Things that felt absurdly out of place in a house where men in suits whispered into phones and rooms stayed locked for reasons no one explained. Luca was gentle, quiet. He didn't ask for much. Didn't demand attention. He just existed beside her, like her presence alone was enough. Sometimes he'd reach for her hand while they walked through the garden. Sometimes he'd fall asleep with his head on her shoulder. And every time, Naomi felt something inside her heal and break at the same time. Marco kept his distance. He'd appear occasionally, standing in doorways, watching them with an expression Naomi couldn't read. He never interrupted, never imposed, just observed, like he was making sure she was real, that she wouldn't vanish. The staff treated her with careful respect. The housekeeper, Rosa, brought her tea without asking. The driver, Anton, always opened her door. The guards nodded when she passed. No one questioned her presence. No one asked who she was or why she mattered. It was like she'd been absorbed into the household without anyone needing to explain it. But Naomi wasn't naive. She knew what this house was. She'd heard the phone calls Marco took in his study, his voice dropping to a tone that made her skin prickle. She'd seen the men who arrived late at night, their faces hard and their conversations brief. She'd noticed the way certain rooms stayed locked, the way certain topics were never discussed. This wasn't just a home. It was the center of something vast and violent, and she was living inside it. One evening, while Luca was at a tutoring session, Naomi wandered into the library. The shelves stretched floor to ceiling, filled with books in multiple languages. She ran her fingers along the spines: philosophy, history, poetry. Whoever had built this collection cared about knowledge, about ideas. It didn't match the image of a man who made people disappear. She pulled out a worn copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, opened it, found notes in the margins, handwritten in neat script, observations about power, about morality, about the cost of control. They were Marco's notes. She could tell by the handwriting. And they were thoughtful, conflicted, human. He was standing in the doorway when she turned around. Naomi jumped, nearly dropping the book. "I didn't mean to sneak up on you." Marco stepped inside. His suit jacket was off, his sleeves rolled to his elbows. He looked less guarded than usual. Tired. "You read philosophy?" Naomi asked, holding up the book. Marco's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "I try to. Helps me justify the things I do." That was the most honest thing he'd said to her. Naomi set the book down carefully. "Does it work?" Justifying it? He was quiet for a moment, then shook his head. "No, but I keep trying anyway." They stood in the library, surrounded by all those words, all those ideas about right and wrong. And Naomi realized that Marco wasn't a monster. He was something worse. He was a man who knew exactly what he was and chose it anyway. "You don't have to stay," he said suddenly. "I meant what I said. You're free to leave." "I know. Then why don't you?" Naomi thought about that, about her empty apartment, her dead-end job, her life of invisible labor and unpaid bills. And she thought about Luca, about the way he'd started smiling again, about the way he slept better when she was there. "Because he needs me," she said finally. Marco's eyes darkened. "And you? What do you need?" The question hit harder than she expected. No one had asked her that in years. What did she need? Safety, purpose, to matter, to be seen. All the things she'd lost and didn't think she'd ever find again. "I don't know," she admitted. Marco stepped closer. Not threatening, just present. "You're good for him. Better than I could have hoped. But this life, it changes people, corrupts them. I don't want that for you. Then let me go." "I can't." The honesty was brutal. He wasn't pretending this was her choice. Wasn't pretending she had power here. He was simply telling her the truth. She was valuable now, and valuable things didn't get to leave. Naomi should have been terrified, should have run, but instead, she felt something unexpected. Relief. Because at least he wasn't lying. At least he wasn't pretending this was something it wasn't. She was trapped, but she was trapped with purpose. And maybe that was better than being free and empty. The weeks turned into months. Naomi stopped going back to her apartment every night, started keeping clothes at the mansion, started eating dinners with Luca and Marco, the three of them sitting at a table big enough for 12. She learned the rhythms of the house, when to ask questions and when to stay silent. She learned which rooms to avoid and which staff members actually ran things. She learned how to exist in the spaces between Marco's world and the normal one. And slowly, against every instinct, she started to feel like she belonged. But belonging came with a cost. She saw things now, heard things. A man arriving bruised and leaving bandaged. A phone call that ended with Marco's knuckles white around his glass. A conversation in Italian that made the guards go tense. This was the price of mattering. You didn't get to choose what you witnessed. You didn't get to stay clean. And Naomi, who'd spent her whole life trying to be good, was learning that goodness was a luxury people like her couldn't afford. Not anymore. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 months after Naomi had started coming to the mansion. They were in the garden, Luca drawing with chalk on the stone pathway while Naomi sat on a bench reading. The sun was warm. The air smelled like jasmine. Everything felt almost normal. Then Luca stopped drawing. His hand hovered over the chalk for a moment before he set it down carefully. He looked at Naomi with those serious eyes, the ones that had always seemed too old. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you think my mom would like you?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Naomi set her book aside and patted the bench. Luca climbed up beside her, his small legs dangling. "I think she would," Naomi said carefully. "But I can't be sure. I never met her." Luca nodded, picked at a thread on his shorts. "She was nice. Like you. She used to read to me every night. Even when she was really sick and it hurt to sit up, she'd still read." Naomi's throat tightened. "She sounds like she loved you very much." Luca was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that shattered her. "She asked my dad to find someone like her, before she died. Someone who would be kind to me. Someone who wouldn't leave." Naomi's breath caught. "What?" "My dad told me. She made him promise. Because she knew he wasn't good at the soft stuff. That's what she called it. The soft stuff. Hugs and bedtime stories and making me feel safe. So she made him promise to find someone who was." Tears burned behind Naomi's eyes. She didn't let them fall. "Not yet. Your mom was very smart." Luca looked up at her. His eyes were wet too. "I think she sent you. Like maybe she's still watching and she knew you'd say yes when I asked. And that's why you're here." The simplicity of his faith broke something in Naomi. This child believed in magic, believed his dead mother had orchestrated this, believed Naomi's kindness was destiny. And maybe it was easier to believe that than to accept the truth. That his father had engineered this, had found someone lonely enough, broken enough, desperate enough to accept a life she didn't choose. But looking at Luca's face, Naomi couldn't bring herself to shatter his hope. So she pulled him close and held him while he cried quietly against her shoulder. She didn't tell him that grief doesn't work that way, that his mother couldn't send anyone, that this was manipulation disguised as care. She just held him, because that's what he needed. And maybe that's what she needed too. When Luca finally pulled away, he wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "Do you think you'll stay? Forever?" Naomi's heart clenched. "I don't know about forever, but I'm here now. That's what matters." Luca nodded, seemed to accept that. Then he climbed down from the bench and went back to his chalk drawing. But Naomi stayed frozen, because now she understood. Marco hadn't chosen her randomly, hadn't just seen an opportunity. He'd been looking for her, for someone exactly like her. Someone kind, someone alone, someone who would fill the hole his wife had left behind, and his wife had asked him to, had made him promise, which meant this wasn't just about control. It was about love. Twisted, complicated, desperate love. The kind that made a dying woman beg her husband to find a replacement. The kind that made a powerful man spend months searching for the right person. The kind that made a little boy believe in miracles. Naomi looked at Luca, humming quietly as he drew, and she realized something terrifying. She was already in too deep. Already loved this child too much to walk away. Already cared too much about keeping the promise his mother had made Marco make. She'd been chosen not because she was special, but because she was perfect for the role. Kind enough to care, Broken enough to stay, lonely enough to need this as much as they needed her. And the worst part? She wasn't even angry. Because for the first time in years, she had a purpose. Even if that purpose was just filling the space a dead woman had left behind. Even if she was a replacement, a stand-in, a placeholder, at least she mattered. If you discovered you were chosen to fill someone else's shoes, would you stay or would you walk away, even if it meant breaking a child's heart? Comment below. Let me know. Because what Naomi learned next would change everything she thought she understood. That night, Naomi couldn't leave it alone. After Luca went to bed, she found Marco in his study. He was at his desk, papers spread in front of him, a glass of whiskey untouched at his elbow. He looked up when she entered. Didn't seem surprised. "You knew I'd come." He leaned back in his chair. "Luca told you." It wasn't a question. Naomi closed the door behind her, stood with her arms crossed. "Your wife asked you to find someone." Marco's jaw tightened. "Yes, and you found me. Not randomly. You were looking." "For months," he admitted. His voice was flat, emotionless. The way people sound when they're confessing something they're not sorry for. "I had people watching, observing women who worked with children, teachers, nurses, daycare workers, anyone who showed consistent kindness without expecting anything in return." Naomi's stomach turned. "You had me investigated. Thoroughly." He met her eyes without flinching. "I know about your marriage, your mother, the baby you lost. I know you work doubles to pay rent on an apartment you hate. I know you eat instant ramen 4 nights a week. I know everything." The violation of it hit her like a slap. Every private pain, every loss, every moment of suffering she'd endured alone. He'd cataloged it all, studied her like she was a case file. "You're a monster." Marco didn't argue, didn't defend himself, just nodded slowly. "Yes, but I'm a monster who keeps promises. And I promised my wife I'd find someone good. Someone who wouldn't hurt him, someone who'd stay." Naomi's hands shook. "So you manipulated me, paid my bills, made me dependent, trapped me. He made you desperate enough to say yes. But I didn't force you. You chose. Every step. You chose." That was the part that hurt most. Because he was right. She had chosen. Even knowing something was wrong. Even feeling the trap closing. She'd chosen to stay. Because she'd needed to be needed. Because Luca had asked. Because loneliness makes people do things they'd never otherwise consider. Naomi sank into the chair across from him. "Why tell me now? You could have kept lying." Marco's expression shifted. Something almost like regret. Because Luca deserves honesty. And so do you. You're not just a placeholder anymore, Naomi. You're real to him. To us. And I won't build that on lies. The admission hung between them. Heavy. True. Naomi looked at this man who'd orchestrated her entire life for months. Who'd turned her poverty into leverage. Who'd used her loneliness as a weapon. And she realized something that should have terrified her. She understood. Not the methods, not the manipulation, but the desperation. The willingness to do anything, break any rule, cross any line to save your child. She'd have done the same. If her baby had lived, if she'd had the chance, she'd have moved mountains, destroyed lives, anything. And maybe that made her just as dangerous as him. "Your wife," Naomi said quietly. "She must have loved him very much." Marco's eyes glistened. "Just once. Just barely. More than anything. Then I'll stay. Not because you trapped me, but because she asked you to find someone. And you did. I'll keep her promise." Marco exhaled. Something in his shoulders loosened. Relief. Gratitude. Maybe even respect. But understand this. Naomi leaned forward. "I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for him. And for her. The woman who loved him enough to plan for her own absence." Marco nodded. "That's all I'm asking." And in that moment, the dynamic shifted. Naomi wasn't a captive anymore. Wasn't a pawn. She was a partner in something bigger than both of them. The care of a child who'd lost too much. It wasn't romance. It wasn't love. It was something stranger, stronger. It was shared purpose. And maybe, in a world as broken as theirs, that was enough. 2 weeks later, everything came to a head. Naomi had been at the mansion for nearly 4 months. She had her own room now, her own routine. She'd quit the diner, stopped paying rent on her apartment, let that old life dissolve like it had never existed. But she hadn't surrendered completely. She still held parts of herself back, still kept emotional distance from Marco, still reminded herself this was temporary, an arrangement, nothing more. Then she walked into the kitchen one morning and overheard a conversation she wasn't supposed to hear. Marco was on the phone, his voice low, controlled, but with an edge that made her freeze in the hallway. I don't care what he said. Make it clear. If he touches my family, he doesn't walk away. Family. He'd said family. And Naomi realized with a jolt that he meant her. She was included in that protection, in that threat, in that circle of people whose safety mattered enough to kill for. When Marco ended the call and turned around, he saw her standing there. His expression didn't change, didn't apologize. You heard. Naomi stepped into the kitchen. Yes, and? She crossed her arms. I need to know what I'm part of. If I'm family, I deserve honesty. All of it. Marco studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded, poured 2 cups of coffee, sat at the kitchen table. She sat across from him. This is the part where you tell me exactly what you do. Not the vague hints, not the careful language. The truth. Marco sipped his coffee. His face was unreadable. I run an organization. We control territory, businesses, trade routes, some legal, most not. People pay for protection, for access, for problems to disappear. Naomi's pulse thudded. And if they don't pay? Then they learn what it costs to refuse. Have you killed people? Yes. Marco said it without hesitation, without shame. Does it bother you? Every time. But I do it anyway. Because that's the world I was born into, the world I chose to stay in. Naomi felt cold. Why tell me this? Because you asked. And because if you're going to stay, you need to know what staying means. You're not just Luca's caretaker. You're part of this family. And families in my world don't get to be innocent. The weight of that settled over her. She thought about leaving, about walking out that door and never coming back. But she also thought about Luca, about the way he smiled now, about the way he slept through the night without nightmares, about the promise she'd made. I have conditions, she said finally. Marco raised an eyebrow. Go on. I don't want to know the details. I don't want to be involved. I don't want to witness anything. If you do what you do it away from me, away from Luca. Agreed. And if I ever feel unsafe, I leave. No questions. No consequences. Marco's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Agreed. And one more thing. Naomi leaned forward. You don't get to control me. I'm not an employee. I'm not a possession. I'm here because I choose to be. And the day that stops being true, I'm gone. For a long moment, Marco said nothing. Then he extended his hand across the table. Deal. Naomi shook it. His grip was firm, respectful. And she realized this was the first time they'd touched as equals, not as captor and captive, not as manipulator and victim, but as 2 people choosing to navigate an impossible situation together. You're stronger than I expected, Marco said quietly. I had to be. The world made sure of that. He almost smiled. My wife would have liked you. That hit differently now. Not as an insult, not as a reminder that she was a replacement, but as a compliment, an acknowledgement. Tell me about her, Naomi said. Marco's expression softened, just slightly. Her name was Isabella. She was a teacher before we met. She didn't come from my world, didn't understand it. But she loved Luca so fiercely that she learned to survive it. And when she got sick, she didn't ask me to save her. She asked me to save him. Naomi's throat tightened. She sounds extraordinary. She was. Marco looked at Naomi with something that might have been gratitude. And so are you. For staying, for not running, for being exactly what he needs. I'm not her. I know, but you're here, and that's enough. They sat in the kitchen as morning light filtered through the windows. Two broken people held together by the needs of a child. It wasn't love. It wasn't even friendship, but it was understanding. And sometimes, that's the strongest bond of all. 6 months became a year. The seasons changed. Winter gave way to spring. Spring melted into summer. And slowly, imperceptibly, everything shifted. Luca transformed first. The quiet, serious boy began to laugh. Really laugh. The kind of bright, uninhibited sound that filled rooms. He started asking questions again. Started wanting to try new things. Soccer. Piano lessons. Science experiments that occasionally exploded in the kitchen. Rosa would shake her head and smile. Naomi would clean up the mess. And Marco would stand in the doorway watching with an expression that looked almost like peace. Luca still had hard days. Days when he'd ask about his mother, when he'd cry and say he missed her. But those days came less frequently. And when they did, he had Naomi. She'd hold him, let him grieve, remind him that missing someone was just proof of how much they'd mattered. You don't stop loving them, she'd say. You just learn to carry it differently. And Luca would nod, wipe his eyes, and keep going. Because that's what survivors did. They kept going. Marco changed too. Slower, more reluctantly. But Naomi saw it. The way he started coming home earlier. The way he'd sit with them at dinner and actually talk instead of just observing. The way he'd read to Luca at bedtime, his deep voice stumbling over children's book sentences like he was learning a new language. One evening, Naomi found him in Luca's room long after the boy had fallen asleep. Marco was sitting in the chair beside the bed, just watching his son breathe. She almost left. But something made her step inside. He's happy, she said quietly. Marco didn't look away from Luca. I know, because of you. Because of us, she corrected. You're doing the work too. Marco finally looked at her. His eyes were tired, but softer than they used to be. I don't know how to be gentle. She smiled slightly. You're learning. They stood in the dim light of the nightlight. Two people who'd started as predator and prey and somehow become something else. Partners, co-parents, something without a name. Do you regret it? Marco asked suddenly. Staying? Naomi thought about that. About her old life. The diner. The tiny apartment. The loneliness that followed her everywhere. Sometimes, she admitted. When I think about how you manipulated me, when I remember I didn't really have a choice, but then I look at him, and I can't regret something that made him smile again. Marco's expression was unreadable. Sorry. For the manipulation. I do it again. But I am sorry. It was the most honest apology she'd ever received. And somehow, it was enough. Naomi changed too. She stopped seeing herself as a victim. Stopped waiting for the trap to close completely. Started making decisions. Started setting rules. Started shaping the household around what Luca needed instead of what Marco's world demanded. She fought for normal, for boundaries, for moments of peace in a life built on violence. When Marco's business crept too close to home, she pushed back. When dangerous men tried to visit during dinner, she made Marco send them away. When Luca asked questions about his father's work, she made sure the answers were age-appropriate. Honest, but not traumatizing. And Marco, surprisingly, listened. Not because he was weak, but because he'd learned something important. That power wasn't just about control. It was about knowing when to yield. The household staff noticed. Rosa started calling Naomi Miss Naomi, with genuine respect. Anton would ask her opinion on routes. The guards would nod and actually make eye contact. She wasn't just the woman who took care of Luca anymore. She was part of the structure, part of the family. One afternoon, while Luca was at school, Marco found Naomi in the garden. She was reading. He sat beside her without asking. We need to talk. Her stomach tightened. About what? People are asking questions. About us. About what you are to me. Naomi set her book down. What do I tell them? Marco met her eyes. The truth. That you're family, not decoration. Not a placeholder. Family. The words settled between them, heavy, real. And for the first time since this whole thing began, Naomi realized she believed it. She'd walked into this house as a transaction, a solution to a problem, a replacement for a dead woman. But somewhere along the way, she'd become real. Not Isabella, not a copy. Just Naomi, flawed and stubborn and scarred, but real and loved. Not romantically, not perfectly, but genuinely. By a boy who needed her, by a man who respected her, by a household that had learned to function around her presence. She'd found family in the last place she'd expected, in a world built on violence, with people who'd chosen darkness. But who'd made space for her light anyway? "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing me. Not just what I could do for Luca, but me." Marco's expression softened. "Thank you for staying, for not giving up on us." And in that moment, surrounded by jasmine and sunlight, Naomi understood. She wasn't trapped anymore. She was home. 14 months after the diner, Naomi stood in front of the bathroom mirror, plastic ring still on her finger. She'd never taken it off. It had become part of her. A reminder of the promise that had changed everything. There was a knock on her bedroom door. "Come in." Marco stepped inside. He looked nervous, an expression she'd never seen on him before. "I have something for you." He held out a small box. Velvet. Expensive. Naomi's heart stuttered. "What is this?" "Open it." Inside was a ring. Real this time. Simple. Elegant. A single diamond that caught the light. "I'm not asking you to marry me," Marco said quickly. "I know that's not what this is. But I'm asking you to stay. Officially. Legally. As Luca's guardian. As my partner in raising him." Naomi stared at the ring. "This isn't about romance. No. It's about commitment. About making permanent what we've built. About giving Luca the stability he deserves." She looked up at him. "And what do I get?" "Security, a home, a family, and the freedom to be exactly who you are. No more pretending this is temporary. No more waiting for the trap. Just life. Real, complicated, imperfect life." Naomi thought about the girl she used to be, the one who dreamed of nursing school and white picket fences, the one who believed love was supposed to look a certain way. That girl was gone, and in her place was a woman who understood that family came in unexpected forms, that love wasn't always romantic. That home was sometimes built in the ruins of other people's plans. She thought about Luca, about his laughter, his healing, his trust, and she realized she'd already made this choice. Months ago, when she'd stopped counting the days and started counting the moments that mattered. "Yes," she said. Marco's shoulders dropped, relief flooding his face. "Yes, yes. But on my terms, always." He smiled, actually smiled. Then he did something that surprised them both. He took the plastic ring off her finger, carefully, reverently, and replaced it with the real one. But he didn't throw the plastic one away. He handed it back to her. "Keep it." As a reminder of how this started, Naomi closed her fist around the cheap plastic. The beginning. The moment a lonely waitress said yes to a child and changed 3 lives forever. "This isn't a fairy tale," she said. "I know. We're not going to fall in love and live happily ever after. Probably not. But we're going to raise that boy together, and we're going to do it right." Marco nodded. "That's all I'm asking." They stood in her bedroom, 2 people who'd been brought together by manipulation and grief and desperate need. And somehow, impossibly, they'd built something real. Not perfect, but real. And that was enough. 2 years later, Naomi stood in the kitchen of the mansion making pancakes. Luca sat at the counter doing homework. Marco read the newspaper. It was Saturday morning. Normal. Quiet. The kind of scene that happened in 1,000 homes across the city. Except this home was different. This home had been built on secrets and manipulation, on loss and loneliness, on a child's innocent proposal in a diner that smelled like burnt coffee. But it was home nonetheless. Luca had grown. He was 8 now, still serious sometimes, still thoughtful. But he laughed easily. made friends, played without fear. The shadow of his mother's death hadn't disappeared, but it no longer defined him. He talked about her often, told Naomi stories, showed her pictures, and Naomi listened, never competed, never tried to replace, just honored the woman who'd loved him first. Sometimes, late at night, Luca would ask Naomi if she thought his mom was proud of him, and Naomi would say yes without hesitation, because she believed it. Isabella had planned for this, had asked Marco to find someone, had trusted that love could transcend death, and, in a way, it had. Marco had changed the most. He still ran his organization, still made hard decisions, still lived in a world Naomi didn't fully understand. But he'd learned to separate that world from this one, to leave the violence at the door, to be a father first. He and Naomi weren't lovers, weren't even particularly close in the traditional sense, but they were partners. They co-parented, made decisions together, fought sometimes, apologized, moved forward. They'd built trust, the kind that came from showing up, day after day, even when it was hard. Naomi had never gone back to the diner, never returned to her old apartment. That life felt like it belonged to someone else. Sometimes, she'd drive past Lena's on her way to pick up Luca from school. She'd see the cracked vinyl booths through the window, see the jukebox that still didn't work, and she'd remember the woman she used to be, tired, invisible, alone. She didn't miss that woman, but she was grateful to her for saying yes, for taking the risk, for believing a child's promise mattered, because that one moment, that one choice, had led to everything. Rosa once asked Naomi if she was happy. Naomi had thought about it. Really thought. And she'd said something that surprised herself. "I'm content. Happiness is too big, too fragile. But contentment? I have that." And it was true. She'd found purpose, family, belonging, not the way she'd expected, not the way she'd planned, but sometimes the best things are the ones you never saw coming. One evening, while tucking Luca into bed, he asked her a question that made her heart stop. "Do you think you'll ever leave?" Naomi smoothed his hair back. "Where would I go? I don't know." But sometimes people leave, even when they promise they won't. She understood then, the fear he still carried, the abandonment he'd survived, the trust that had been broken when his mother died. Not by choice, but broken nonetheless. "I'm not going anywhere," she said firmly. "You're stuck with me. Promise? Promise." Luca smiled, closed his eyes. And for the first time in his life, he believed it. Downstairs, Marco was waiting. They sat in the study, the fire crackling, the house quiet around them. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For keeping your promise. All of them." Marco looked at her with something that might have been admiration. "You could have run 100 times. Could have taken the money and disappeared. Could have broken his heart. But you didn't, because promises matter. Even the ones made to children. Even the ones that cost us everything." Marco raised his glass. "To unexpected kindness." Naomi raised hers. "To broken people who find each other." They drank. And in that moment, Naomi understood the lesson her life had been teaching her. That family isn't about blood or law or even choice. It's about showing up, about saying yes when the world expects you to say no, about keeping promises even when they trap you, especially then. She'd walked into a diner as a lonely waitress and walked out as someone's answer to a prayer. She'd been chosen, manipulated, trapped, but she'd also been seen, needed, loved. And in the end, maybe that was all any of us really wanted, to matter, to someone, somewhere, somehow. So what would you have done? If a child asked you to marry him in a diner and you found out his father was dangerous, powerful, desperate, would you have run? Or would you have stayed for the boy who believed in your promise? Here's what I know. Kindness is never wasted, even when it costs you, even when it traps you, even when it changes your life in ways you never planned. Naomi didn't get a fairy tale. She got something better. She got purpose, family, a child who needed her. And sometimes that's the greatest love story of all. Not romance, but redemption. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button. Because next week, we're diving into another tale of unexpected choices. Another moment when someone said yes and changed everything. And trust me, you won't want to miss it. Drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me what you would have done. Tell me if you've ever made a promise that changed your life. Because your story matters too. And maybe, just maybe, someone needs to hear it. Until next time, remember this: the smallest kindness can save a life, even if that life is your own.